So it's my pleasure to introduce Colin Camerer, Robert Kirby Professor of Behavioral Economics, and he's also the Leadership Chair and Director of the T&C Chen Center for Social and Decision Neuroscience at Caltech. He earned a PhD from the University of Chicago, and then he went on to work at Northwestern, Penn, and Chicago before joining the faculty at Caltech in 1994. He was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and he was also named a MacArthur Fellow in 2013. And to date, only 14 Caltech faculty have shared this prestigious honor. Colin works at the interface of psychology, neuroscience, and economics. And the work he works on is decision-making, strategic thinking, and trading in markets. And he's also a pioneer in the field of neuroeconomics. And today, he's going to share his insight from psychology, neuroscience, and economics on what to expect once this pandemic is over in terms of people's behavior. So I'd like to now hand over to Colin.
Thanks, Sean, and particularly everyone for coming. This is a new kind of science communication for us, and it's actually really thrilling, and I'm so glad people are interested in this topic. As mentioned, I'm going to talk about something called forced exploration and speculate about the new normal from COVID-19. I should add this research has been supported by the Chen Institute and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation on studying habits. So we're going to talk about four things today, which is the psychology and neuroscience of habit, a London tube strike, which is a beautiful example of what we mean by forced exploration, a little bit of science on neural autopilot theory and how that may be used as a forecasting tool, and then some very speculative discussion of forecasting the new normal with a little bit of data from things that are going on. You know, we're literally updating these data every day. Okay, so let me explain what I mean by habit. So I used to live in Chicago. In Chicago, I would typically take a cab to the airport to O'Hare. And so one day I was coming back from New York and probably a little stressed and tired and, you know, planning to go somewhere, a little bit distracted. And I went out and saw a yellow cab at the cab stand. This is pre-rideshare. And I saw the yellow cab. We call that a queue in animal learning. I got in the cab and went home. So far, so good. The problem was the next morning I got up and went to get my car. In Chicago, as some of you know, has two seasons, Siberia and August. It was Siberia season. And so I went to the parking garage, underground garage, and said to my friend, the attendant, can you grab my car? And he said, oh, your car's not here. I thought, I mean, was it stolen? He said, no, remember, I think you went on our trip a few days ago. And indeed, I had driven my car rather than taking a cab, which was the default, the kind of habit. And my car was sitting in a parking lot at O'Hare. So I had to sheepishly get in a cab and take a cab to the parking lot at O'Hare with no luggage, which amused the cab driver, and get my car back. So this is an action slip or a habit mode. The idea is I saw a familiar queue, the yellow cab. I got in it because that's what I usually did. Usually that was reliably rewarding, meaning I was, you know, it was the same fare every time and there were some differences in traffic, but it wasn't enough to make me break that habit. So that's a habit. Here's some non-human organisms making the same point. That's called a stimulus response relations, right? Habit, the yellow cab, and this poor amoeba is getting yelled at for having been too stimulus response oriented. Okay, from serious science. So this is some of the famous, some of the precursors of this have been in the literature for a long time, but this is a famous, beautiful set of simple experiments by Chris Adams and Tony Dickinson. And they're going to define habit as insensitivity to devaluation. So that if you have a stimulus response and the responses yield outcomes, the outcome part sort of drops away. And so you respond to the stimulus even when outcomes are not valued. So you're not trying to achieve a goal, which is to eat well. It's as if pressing the lever is the goal. So the rats are trained instrumentally, which means stimulus response training. They press a lever and then food is dispensed. Some of the rats, the treatment group, then get a break and they get to eat as much of the pellets of food as they want, but they're laced with a mild toxin that doesn't really hurt them, but it just gives them a stomach ache. And it creates a taste aversion when they look at the pellets and it's like, oh gosh, I don't want to eat that again. And the control group of rats don't have this devaluation. Then both groups are put in the test phase and they have a chance to press a lever to get food. If they're habitized, they will keep pressing. even though the food is devalued. They really don't want to eat these pellets. If they're not habitized and they're goal-directed, they'll go to press the lever and think, wait a minute, is my goal to eat food? This is not the kind of food I want to eat. So we're going to see from lever pressing how habitized they are. And so with their moderate training, that's on the order of 100 trials, I think, or so in these animal experiments. When they have a valued control, that means the food is still good. They press about 7 times per minute. The devalued condition, where they had outcome evaluation from the food being slightly poisoned, they only press about half as much. So this gap, the drop from white to gray, measures the degree of goal-directed suppression of the pressing. And this part, the remaining part in gray, is the habit part. So they're about half goal-directed. They're not responding as quickly in the outcome evaluation. They shouldn't be, but they're still responding. But with rats with extensive training, like hundreds and hundreds of trials, so it's very habitized, you see no difference between the the white and gray bars. They're pressing equally vigorously. So these rats are, if they could speak, they would say, I don't know why I'm pressing this bar. I'm getting this food I don't even want to eat. I guess this is just what I do. Okay, there's a couple of challenging bits of science like rapids and whitewater rafting. Try not to fall out of the boat. This is one. This is a beautiful paper by John and Bernard Baleen. And I'm going to show you how there are similar areas in the rat and human brain called homologies. They're not exactly the same because the human brain is sort of a lot of neocortex on top of mammalian, ape brain, and so on. But with the rats, we can do things like lesion and disrupt activity in the brains and see if we can turn habits on and off. And we can. Or I should say Bernard Baleen and others have been able to do so. So in the rodents, this is called a prelimbic region in orange. And if you lesion that with a kind of toxin or other ways of disrupting activity, it decreases goal-directed responding. So now the rats will not suppress the habit response. In humans, if you do a very similar type of habit task, these are data from John, you see activity in this region called medial orbital frontal cortex, sort of here, that's shown in a lot of studies at Caltech to be involved in valuation and particularly in sort of adding up different elements of valuation in service of choice. And so in humans, this is active when you're goal-directed. In rats, if you lesion the homologous region, prelimbic, you abolish or reduce the goal-directedness. And on the habit side, it's the opposite. In this dorsolateral striatum in purple, if you lesion that area, you reduce habits. The rats suddenly are not as habitual. They're much more goal-directed. And in humans, this dorsolateral striatum area seems to control habits. So there's quite this is just the tip of an iceberg of a lot of data on human and rat homology. Okay, the next step is we're going to flash forward now to 2019. So Aniak Recent has worked on this project along with Omar Perez and John, and this is her master's thesis. And this is humans, it turns out, are a little bit harder to habitize by having long numbers of trials than rats. So it's a little bit harder work to get a good habit paradigm working. And then once we have that, we can study, we here mostly meaning John and his collaborators, we can study things like, are people more habitual when they're stressed? You know, is habit associated with intelligence and impulsivity? Are there computational psychiatric disorders that are associated with being overly habitized or under habitized? It opens up this whole cornucopia of cool things to study. So here's how it works. The subjects come and they sit and see a computer. They have a joystick in front of them, and they can move the joystick left or right. Just the same kind of joystick, for playing video games and stuff. And so the first part they get trained is if they move to the right, that's what the icon indicates, moving to the right. The little purple is to the right of the box. Then they're going to get a silver virtual coin that shows up in kind of a piggy bank. If they move to the left, they're going to get gold. So left gold, silver right, left gold, silver right. Okay. And importantly, they're on a random schedule, which means they don't get a coin each time. About 1 out of 30, it's like a slot machine, they get coins. So they have to move the joysticks pretty rapidly back and forth. Some of them are going 2 or 3 times a second in order to try to maximize their chance. So they're going back and forth for a few seconds. Click, there's a coin, coin, click, coin. They got lucky on the third one, and so on. Now what we're going to do is the equivalent of the rats, where we're going to make the food less palatable. We're going to devalue it. we're going to devalue one of the two coins, in this case, the gold one. And then we'll do a parallel experiment with silver and see if it doesn't make any difference what the color is. So now gold is devalued, and that's done by just telling people all the coins you've accumulated have been in a kind of piggy bank you can see on your computer. Your gold piggy bank is full. We're going to convert these silver and gold to money we actually pay you at the end of the experiment to motivate people to take it seriously. And if you get more gold coins in the next part of the experiment, it's not going to be worth anything to you. So next, what we do is a consumption test, and you just see coins on the screen, and you can click on whichever ones you want. This is just to check that they kind of got the instruction, that they know, again, these are humans, right? They're smarter than rats, that they know that gold is now worthless. And so sure enough, they collect a lot of silver coins. Now there's a choice test, or something that's called pseudo-extinction. And the idea is to see if they can now choose to move the joystick left or right to get silver or gold, what do? If they're habitized, remember, gold is worthless. If they move to the left, they get gold. They shouldn't move to the left if they're purely goal-directed. If they're goal-directed, they'll move to the right only. If they're partly habitized, they'll go back and forth and do some of each. And so here's what happens. The key number here is called the devaluation ratio. It's basically the number of joysticks moved toward the valued good, like to the right to get silver, versus valued plus devalued. Okay, and so this ratio, if they only move in the value direction and never in the devalued move is 0, the ratio is going to be 1. That's purely goal directed. If they move equally in value and devalued, because they kind of can't help themselves, they're just used to collecting both kinds of coins, even though part of the brain we know, because we asked them and they did the consumption test, they know that the devalued coins are not going to earn them more money. That will be habitized. If the valued and devalued number of movements left and right are the same, this ratio would be 1/2. And so what you see is the undertrained group, I think they do this for 7 or 10 or 12 minutes, exhibits something in between goal-directed and habit. And more importantly, the overtrained group is much more likely to work by moving the lever in the direction of devalued goods. They just execute this habit, just like me getting in the cab at O'Hare when my car was parked half a mile away was a mistake. This is similarly habitual type of mistake. Okay, next step is the London tube strike. So this is a beautiful study done by some economists. And again, we're going to call this forced exploration. So what happened is the London tube is the subway or underground system. It's very busy. It's huge. This is just a part of the map of the entire London tube. And what happened is a few years ago, for a 40-hour period, I think during the week when people were commuting and the commuters would notice, the workers in the tube union wanted to make a point by going on strike so that people would realize what a pain it was that they couldn't get back and forth in the tube and they could get higher wages or whatever they're bargaining for. And importantly and scientifically very helpfully, they only do this in part of the tube system. So we can compare the people whose tube commutes at Charing's Cross are now shut down. They have to go somewhere differently. They have to ride share, they have to walk, they have to use a different part of the tube system. And the control group is people who don't have any disruption at all. They just keep going. So we can compare the two groups. And we're going to exploit the fact that, you can see my Oyster card. Where are you? Ah, there it is. I have an Oyster card from visiting London a lot. And sabbatical in Oxford a few years ago. The Oyster card stores value, and when you get on the subway, if you don't want to rifle through for money, you tap your Oyster card, it charges you, and then you tap in, and then you tap out. So the people who are the data analytics team for Oyster know exactly, and it's ID'd. So if it's me, they know, oh, Colin Camerer went here and this day, and then here the next day. And so you can see what happens during regular commutes for people who had to try out a new route. And one of the elements of the habit model that we're going to get into more detail on is once you're in habit mode, the whole point of habit mode is to make things effortless when they're reliably rewarding, meaning it's pretty much the same every day. If it's not reliably rewarding, there's a number that's going to go up in the theory, and it's going to say, I should try some other things. So forced exploration means you have to try other things and break out of your habit. And you may find a new and better behavior that you didn't find before because you were in habit mode and you weren't exploring adequately. And indeed, that's what happened. So 5% of the people found a better commute, and they saved about 40 seconds per trip. Again, that's not a huge time savings, but it's a pretty substantial percentage. And that means that they're saving, according to the back of the envelope calculation by these folks, they're saving about 400 British pounds. Okay, so what habits will be the new normal in 2021? Here's one. We've been going to this local grocery store, H Mart. It's Korean run, and it has shortish lines, and it's open a lot. It's very safe. Everyone has been wearing masks there for possibly months or weeks. And we've been trying a lot of different foods like seaweed and rice soup. Of course, it's going to be difficult to forecast from our simple model and data what's going to happen next year, but we're just going to guess. So keep in mind that, as Yogi Berra said, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. Okay, here's a snippet of data from Fitbit. These are Fitbit has a science blog, so they actually talk about lots of things. This one I thought was quite interesting. So compared to kind of a baseline of 0, in several different cities, there's a big jump, first in Milan, which of course had a terrible COVID outbreak in Italy, and then later around the 15th of March, there's a big spike, and it all happens almost simultaneously, except for London actually, in a week. And people are suddenly in these different cities sleeping 15 or 20 minutes extra per day. Now, it may be they're sleeping later because they don't have to commute. It may be they're depressed or they're tired. Who knows, right? There's a bunch of, from this picture alone, we don't know exactly what's going on, but something interesting is happening. And the kind of question we'd like to be able to answer is, what will the new normal be? Will it go back to 0 and the old sleeping habits, or will be some kind of change? Maybe because people are now teleworking, or they've gotten used to sleeping a little extra. Maybe they're mentally healthier, maybe not. And we can also see interesting variation across these different cities. So as a scientist, we can look and see, why is Zurich, Barcelona, and Paris all different? Did something different happen in terms of when people were social distancing, cultural norms, and so on? And a lot of data is being collected right now by a lot of people, including the Census Bureau is going to collect US data, and cell phone companies who collect data on where your cell phone is tracking you all the time. So there's going to be a huge amount of golden age of social science emerging. Here's some data that some colleagues, Yu Xin, Matt Shum, Lawrence Jin, and I have collected from Weibo, which is essentially the Chinese Twitter. So these are just word counts of how much people say things on Weibo from natural language processing. This is the simplest kind of machine learning or AI, just counting stuff up. We can do a lot more sophisticated things, and we will, but this is just the first cut. So on the x-axis is the time, is the week in the year, and the y-axis is how many uses of that word or phrase were on Weibo. And the vertical dotted lines in red are really important. The first one is when lockdown was imposed in Wuhan, which, as many of you know, was a very aggressive, draconian lockdown of a huge city of many millions of people. And a few weeks later, around week 14, was 0 new cases in Wuhan. And then people felt much more comfortable going out, and the lockdown was gradually lifted differentially. And so all the pictures except one show you the same picture. There's a big jump in talking about masks, then it goes down. Big jump in talking about hand washing, big jump in working from home discussion, and then it goes down. Now again, this is just talking. So sometimes what may happen is people talk about masks, like, where can I get masks? Are you wearing masks? Look at my mask. And then it goes down, but the mask wearing has a different shape. So we need to have behavioral data to match up with these words to see if actions and words match. The most interesting one I think is on the right, which is food delivery. And so what you see here is there's a jump in discussions of food delivery, and then it goes back. And for the 3, masks, hand wash, work from home, it looks like it goes back close to the old normal, the pre-pandemic, but a little bit different. But it looks like food delivery may really change somewhat permanently. Okay, so a little bit of, this is the last bit of like Whitewater Rapids, please stay in the boat in terms of science. Along with these gentlemen, Peter Landry and Ryan Webb, we have been working on a Neuro Autopilot theory. It's very similar to something John's worked on called arbitration between a habit system and a goal-directed system, and a few other people have been working on similar ideas. This is just our kind of flavor and brand. So we're going to study some simple mathematical examples of somebody who can go to the gym. Now suddenly there's a lockdown, they can't go to the gym, so they have to explore a new activity. We're going to call it TV yoga, like yoga at home. Okay, and so we're going to look how these models work. But before we do that, I need a little icon for yoga at home. What does yoga at home look like? So I went on the web and Googled, as one does. And if you type in yoga at home, you get pictures of these incredibly limber, Gumby, like superhumans watching TV of other incredibly limber, Gumby, like superhumans. I wanted something a little more realistic. So I typed in realistic yoga, and you get this. Upside down logo. And I should add, somebody on this call was telling me earlier today they actually do this. So this is not unheard of, but maybe it's like a Southern California woo thing. Let me use this picture instead. This is from an article titled 10 Yoga Poses to Do While Watching TV. Maybe this is more like what most of you do, right? Like if you've ever gotten the wrong cab at O'Hare like I did, you know, raise your hand. Okay, so this is going to be our little icon. Okay, so here's how this model works. People start out doing activity 1, going to the gym. At day 0, there's a lockdown. They can't go to the gym. And so they start to do TV yoga. And here the lockdown is only 2 days. And so what happens in the 2 days, the key thing in this graph is D. It's the D line. D is reward reliability. Low D means it's been pretty good every day. It's kind of up to my expectations. A high D means unreliable. Like if you try something new and it's terrible one day and it's really hard, like I watch one TV yoga and I can't understand it. The other one's way too hard and I'm sore, right? That would be, this D value would go way up like you see over here on the right. And so in this particular numerical case, there's a lot of numbers like feeding into making this graph. In this numerical case, the D goes up and down, it becomes pretty reliable, and this person sticks with activity 2, TV yoga. After the lockdown's over, they don't go back to the gym. They keep doing number 2. The blue person is different. They don't like yoga as much. And built into the model is the idea of like getting tired, like reactance, we call it. Like I'm kind of sick of this. I'm only doing this TV yoga because the gym is closed. As soon as the gym's open. And so these D values going up, that means this person is not really happy with how reliably pleasurable doing TV yoga is. It goes up and then it starts to go down. But when the lockdown is lifted, for this case, it's after 12 days, they go back to the gym. So what we want to know is, do you keep doing TV yoga, depending on these mathematical numbers, or do you go back to the gym? And the rest of the talk will just be kind of guessing about some of these things. So here's a case from Weibo. We can, again, I don't know where they actually exercise, but we can look at what people said. So there's a big jump in talking about exercise at home from about 100 per day to 300. And then when the 0 cases are lifted, more people are going out to parks and things. There's a drop down to 150. So I think most of the new normal is going to look like this picture, in the sense that there's a drop from the peak during the pandemic, but it's going to go back to something which is well above the old normal. And the interesting question is, which of these forced expirations stick? Does it vary across people? Are these better for people, or are these people who said, wow, I never thought of doing TV yoga, like the London Tube, but now that I had to try it, I've gotten to really like it, and who wants to pay a gym membership? I never go enough, I feel guilty, etc. So we're trying to guess what the trajectory of this thing will be for the future year. Okay, so here's a few guesses about what habits might be more likely to be the new normal and less likely. The ones that are most likely, because of Neuro Autopilot, are things often that people can do, and that often a lot of the sturdiest concept of habit often has to do with motor and action sequences that you do very repeatedly, like your morning routine. You get up and make coffee. Now your routine's disrupted because you used to get up and make coffee at, say, 7:10 in order to wake the kids and drive to work. Now, if your kids are like mine, my son said, you have school at 8:15, when should we should wake you up? And he said 8:10. His goal is to have like the minimal commute from his bed to the laptop in his room. So your morning routines will be disrupted. Maybe the new normal will be better or different. Hygiene is one. I think people will wash their hands more often, probably not as often as right now, and maybe not with the 20 seconds that docs have been encouraging us to do. I think food delivery, based on the Weibo data, is going to be persistent. There's also some economics here, right? The food delivery companies are competing like crazy, and they have a learning curve, so they're getting better at figuring out what to do. People are finding new types of foods and new delivery companies they like. like the forced expiration. I think people will not go out to the movies that much because of forced expiration of things at home like Netflix and Amazon Prime and Disney and whatever your fave is. One interesting thing that I thought was kind of cute was low-key barter. So we live in a wonderful part of Pasadena that has where it's very easy to grow roses. It helps if your wife is a fantastic gardener. And so we've been bartering. We have all these roses. We can only fit so many in our vases. They don't last forever. So neighbors have been coming over and saying, oh, your roses are wonderful. Take some, take some, take some. So we've been trading roses for Argentinian nut bread, which is a really good deal for us. Things that are harder to forecast and which require more collective action, like institutions and schools and things changing. It's a lot harder to know what the new normal will be, so I'm just going to speculate. One is telemedicine. A lot of tech companies like Alphabet, Google's parent company, have been, and many med tech companies have been interested in telemedicine. You know, why should you have to go to a doctor's office? Probably there will be some diagnoses and some reasons why you should, but if you don't have to, you know, we may be able to apps that scan your skin, or you may be able to, people can take their temperature at home or their blood pressure with blood pressure kits. And this is a big disruption too, because it changes the economics a lot. And also you have to think about things like medicine across state lines. You know, maybe there'll be one state that has the cheapest and the best telemedicine. And since a lot of regulations are done at the state level, there's a lot of complicated moving parts. I think telework for knowledge professionals will increase. One reason is that people don't like to commute in general. And I think a lot of companies already work in this direction, like small startups often have software engineers around the world. Teleschooling, I think colleges, who knows what's going to happen. I think online education will probably not for pre-higher ed, for grade school and high school, probably won't. We'll go back to schools in a pretty regular way. There will be some shift to online learning. I'm just noting there that we have Zern is one company that works on this. So there are a lot of ed tech companies trying to work on device-based learning, not for remoteness, although that just came along as sort of a bizarre and dramatic change, but in order to gamify and be able to collect more data on how kids learn and to help them learn better. A silver lining I think is very interesting is, suppose that new normal habits form around hygiene, maybe social isolation. People are a little more sensitive about visiting their ill relatives, someone in a nursing home or someone with asthma. And people are more likely to either wear masks in public, as you're going to see a lot of in Asia. I think it's partly related to cultural norms and what have you. But even if people just wash their hands more and do a lot fewer things to limit the spread of flu, suppose these are flu death statistics week by week from the CDC. In 2017, for example, there was 38,000 deaths per year. Suppose you cut that down by 10%. That's 4,000 people less who die. Over a 10-year period, that's 40,000. And so there may be, you know, again, for the forced expiration of the London Tube helped 5% people find a better commute. And the new normal forced expiration may have some silver linings of this kind. Now, to wrap up, not everything will persist. These are Chinese school children who have little hats they've been made in crafts with kind of pointers that stick out. And the idea is to have something fun to do for the kids, but also the idea is that they're kind of reminded to maintain distance from one another because of germ transmission, and it also keeps them from whispering and fooling around and fidgeting. Here's a close-up of one whippersnapper with her balloon ears. And this actually was inspired by a type of garment in the Song Dynasty a few years ago, apparently, and the courtiers had to wear these things that would stick out. And supposedly the reason was the emperors were constantly being schemed against, and they didn't want the courtiers like whispering to each other and like disrupting the emperors. And the same with teachers, right? This keeps the kids from like looking at each other's fidgeting around as they often do. This probably will not persist, but it's cute to see it. And so thanks for your participation. These are two popular science books. One is brand new by Wendy Wood, is a kind of collaborator of ours at USC, and a really nice book by Charles Duhigg if you want to read more about the basic habit neuroscience and psychology that we talked about.
Thank you very much, Colin, for a wonderful talk. And it's great to hear that there might be some positive outcomes as well as bad outcomes of this pandemic. So I'd like to take some questions from the audience. And I'm going to start with a question that Amanda Ganguly has raised, which is, how does an individual self-detect that he or she is in habit behavior versus goal-directed behavior?
Oh, great. Thank you, Ananda, who's a behavioral economist. I think the hallmark of a lot of habits, like the hand washing, forget the yellow cab, are what habit is for. I think about this the way biologists like David Marr do. Like, we don't really understand something unless we understand kind of its function and its adaptive purpose, the algorithmic specification, like some equations, which I kind of hinted at, and then the underlying neural mechanism. That's what we're aiming for in neuroeconomics, is to see three levels of understanding. So what habit is for is to save mental effort when performing the same action over and over is good in the sense of reward reliability. And so we think that will be accompanied by less attention. You don't have to pay as much attention. Like, people will be hand washing and they won't be counting up to 20. They'll have just become automated, perhaps. People may have trouble like actually remembering and telling you why they're doing what they're doing. Like, did you wash your hands? How many times did you wash your hands today? I don't know. Like, I wasn't really thinking about it. That's what habit's for, right? So one hallmark of habit is a kind of forgetfulness and sort of a mindlessness, which is what habit facilitates. And often I think what happens is we're startled out of realizing how habitized things really are. So when I took the cab from O'Hare, the next time I took a cab, I came out and I stopped and thought, where's my car, right? And I did that a couple more times until I went back to habit mode.
So Colin, another question, and this is from William Banks. I think you touched on it a little bit in your talk, but maybe you can elaborate. Do you think that people will continue to stay more socially distant than before the pandemic, even after the virus problem has been adequately solved?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, there are a lot of, in most cultures, there's a kind of appropriate zone of social distance, right? And 6 feet is too far away. So I think what you'll see is almost like there's a rubber band, right? Like, you're stretching the rubber band of connection out to 6 feet, and it'll kind of snap back a little bit. I have a feeling there may be some domain-specific things, like I think when people, I wouldn't be surprised, for example, when people are waiting in line at a store. A lot of stores now will have like tape on the floor that says wait 6 feet. I think we might start to see people, with the new normal was like, my shopping cart is 18 inches away, now it's going to be 3 feet away. And there may also be differential social distancing to strangers and family and things like that. So maybe if you had beautiful data on, say, who's at a park and how far people are, or on the beach, then we'll just see a little bit less beach crowding. And again, with cell phones and things, there's actually a chance to maybe really measure these things, as amazing as it is, from sensors. But I think generally, I think the degree of social distancing is really culturally unnatural and kind of off-putting. And I think we're not going to snap back. We're going to snap back quite a ways to pre-social distancing. And there may be some architectural things too, like, almost surely that when sports arenas are opened again for, say, basketball, they probably will not sell at every seat. And so you may actually see different kinds of construction, where there's more space between seats or something of that kind.
Thank you, Colin. So here's a more of an economic question. Many creditors have allowed borrowers to skip payments. This is from John Krauss, by the way, due to COVID-19. So how hard will it be for creditors to get borrowers out of this new habit of not making loan payments for 6 months?
I think that will be okay. I mean, our kind of science fiction fantasy is that if there's two numbers in our model, one is the learning rate, which is a number that's been in animal learning for decades and decades, which is how quickly people adjust, how quickly people learn the value of new things and adjust the reward reliability. And if we knew that, and what people found rewarding, and maybe whether there are regular motor actions, like if you press send on your app to send your rent, as opposed to writing out a check, and mailing it, we should be able to say, you know, people who are paying the rent in a one particular way that's more habitizable, it'll be harder to get them to make payments than the others. And most of these models, like the example I gave you with the 2-day lockdown and a 12-day lockdown, the simple blue and red example, the longer a habit goes on, the longer it's likely to persist. I think that probably things like loan payments are just going to go back. But it also depends upon, you know, the lab experiments tell us about an animal or a human in kind of isolation, and there's no supply and demand and markets kind of circumscribing that.
Okay, and there's another question here from Alice Lyons, and this is about sort of the opposing drives to habits. So she says, when the lockdown is over, I'm excited to jump immediately back into activities that are now forbidden, like movie theaters. Do you think that the psychological drive to return to normal will diminish the staying power of some of these current habits?
Yeah, this is a super interesting question. It's something, so there is, it's not in the models that I kind of showed you, but you can easily put in an ingredient, which is something like a nostalgia, or, you know, wanting to, even if I feel like I've established a new habit like yoga, like, you know, somebody says, oh, you want to go to the gym? I'll go to the gym. I haven't been in months. Yeah, maybe I should go back and try it and see. I think part of the new normal, like, I shouldn't be so mean about movie theaters. It's just that they're expensive. And the economics of the movie business just makes it very hard for movie theaters to charge low ticket prices, and they make a lot of money in concessions and so on. So there's a lot of things to compete. I think the only people who go to movies regularly in 2021 in the US will be people without air conditioning who are trying to get out of the heat in California or Las Vegas or Arizona, and teenagers who want to get out of the house and hang out with their friends. But I think this will be a really interesting thing. I think most likely what we'll see, rather than this kind of hard habitization that we saw in those pictures, you'll see, like, you know, let me go back and try it again. Or it may be like, if I was in the restaurant business or analyzing, I think restaurants have to deliver a reason why you would want to be in that restaurant, even as people have gotten kind of used to having delivery. So it may be mariachi bands or you know, free stuff. You know, if you come back and join us as we're reopening, and everyone gets a free drink or a free dessert. So I think that's a super interesting question. You know, a lot of people have said, oh, I can't wait to go back to the beach or go back to NASCAR or go back to clothes shopping. And I think my hunch is there's like a 1/3, 2/3 rule that we'll move 2/3 back to the old normal for a lot of things, and 1/3 will stick.
So I have another question. It's actually in the chat. The questions should go in the Q&A, but there is one in the chat that I think looks interesting. So I'm going to take the prerogative to read this one. It's from Kieran Creza Real. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. Has anyone looked into maladaptive habits such as over-drinking, overeating, and so on, which have started in some people as a result of the pandemic?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I'm very glad you mentioned that, because I talked about the silver linings, but not the stomach linings. There's no question that there's a lot of short-run bad effects besides health effects. Mental health, a horrific one to think about, but I think we really have to look at and confront it, is domestic violence. A lot of people with kids describe them being a little bit crazy. I think one of the things many social scientists agree on is in a rapid sweeping pandemic of this kind, it sort of shines like a spotlight or like an amplification on all of the strengths and weaknesses of families, institutions, societies, governments, right? So governments, particularly in Asia, that have been very successful, like in Taiwan, if you're someone who you've been in contact with is diagnosed with COVID, the police come to your door and say, you've been contact traced, you have to quarantine, and there's all these restrictions. You can get arrested if you leave. They are not playing, right? They are not playing. And so there's no question there'll be some short run pain. Social, humans are social animals. A lot of what source of happiness is like hanging out with their friends and family and, being outdoors doing stuff. If you take that away, it's like putting people in kind of solitary confinement, except we have Zoom and food delivery and so on. So that's really bad. Will a lot of people start to drink and develop bad habits and be more sedentary. People joke the COVID-19 is the 19 pounds you're going to gain from like eating snack food at home. There's no question there'll be some bad production of vices and bad habits, and that'll just be a challenge. The good news is those habits may be very, the cue might be, I worked at home all day and the kids were home and I really need a glass and it's wine o'clock. And when those social circumstances disappear, so you were not working at home all day, you come back, it may be that you don't have the same cueing of wine o'clock because the wine o'clock cue came from these very special circumstances. So there's some hope that these are temporary bad habits that can either be fixed or, when we're in a different cue state, a different social environment, they'll disappear.
Okay, here's another question from a guy called Dean Mobbs, who's actually a colleague of both of ours and gave the last talk, if I understand, in this webinar series. And he's asking, do you become more habitual when you're anxious?
Now, if he was here, I would ask an expert, Dean Mobbs, who studies anxiety. I know, and John, please help me on this too, but I think there's a pretty good correlation between stress and habit. And of course, stress and anxiety are a little bit different. Stress is a very particular biological activity involving hyperactivity of a certain kind. And that does seem to increase habit, like causally. You can make people more stressed temporarily in tasks like the one that I described with coin collecting. And it does look like stress makes people more habitual in cases like that. Whether anxiety works in quite the same way, I don't know.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Colin. I'd like to thank you again for a wonderful talk. That was the last question that we can take right now.